If you take a vitamin D tablet every morning with your coffee because your doctor told you years ago that your levels were a little low, how confident are you that anyone ever explained what happens if you take a little too much for a little too long? Most people pause right there. They have never been told that the very supplement marketed to protect their bones can, in the wrong amount, quietly turn against their kidneys. Consider a man in his late 70s, call him Walter, the kind of case this pattern shows up in again and again. Walter had been on a high dose vitamin D regimen for months, prescribed after a routine blood test flagged him as deficient. He felt fine, a little more tired than usual, maybe, and his skin had started to itch at night, but at his age, who doesn't have something? Then the dizziness started. He went in for what he assumed would be a quick check, and the blood work came back wrong in a way that surprised everyone in the room. His calcium was high. His kidney function, which had been normal for years, had quietly collapsed. What looked like a harmless wellness habit had become an emergency. What makes Walter's situation worth sitting with is how unremarkable it looked from the outside, right up until the moment it wasn't. Nobody in his life would have flagged a vitamin bottle on the kitchen counter as a risk. He hadn't changed his diet, he wasn't on any new prescription. The only thing that had quietly shifted month after month was a number building up inside him that nobody was tracking, because nobody had told him it needed tracking. That gap, between a habit that feels completely safe and a habit that is silently accumulating risk, is exactly what this video is built to close. A quick note before we go further. This channel is for general education, not medical advice, and I am not your doctor. Nothing here is a diagnosis or a prescription. Always talk with your own doctor or pharmacist before changing anything about your vitamins, your supplements, or your medications. With that said, let me walk you through exactly how a vitamin built to help your bones can end up hurting your kidneys instead. Why people over 65 are far more exposed to this than younger adults, and the specific warning signs worth knowing before your next blood draw. Here is the distinction almost nobody explains, and it is the one that matters most. Vitamin D is not just a vitamin in the way vitamin C or vitamin B12 are vitamins. Those are water soluble. Your body uses what it needs and quietly flushes the rest out through your urine. Vitamin D is fat soluble, which means it behaves more like a hormone than a nutrient. It gets stored in your fat tissue and your liver. It builds up slowly over weeks and months, and your body has no fast, simple way to dump the excess. Think of it less like filling a glass of water under a tap you can turn off instantly, and more like filling a slow draining tank. You can keep pouring in long after the tank looks full, and you won't see the overflow until it's already a problem. This single distinction is why vitamin D toxicity behaves so differently from, say, taking too much vitamin C for a week. There is no quick reset button once the tank has been filling for months. The reason this matters so much for the kidneys specifically comes down to one job vitamin D does in your body. It controls how much calcium your gut absorbs from food and how much your bones release into your blood. That is exactly why it helps prevent fractures. But when vitamin D levels climb too high, that same mechanism goes into overdrive. Your gut starts absorbing far more calcium than your body needs. Your bones release more than usual, and your blood calcium rises. Your kidneys are the organs that have to filter all of that extra calcium out of your bloodstream around the clock. Ask too much of them for too long, and the calcium itself starts to injure the very filtering structures that are supposed to be removing it. It becomes a vicious cycle. The kidneys get damaged, which makes it harder for them to clear the excess calcium, which damages them further. This is not a rare or theoretical risk. Doctors actually have a name for the condition that results, hypercalcemia, meaning too much calcium in the blood, and it is the recognized mechanism behind vitamin D toxicity. A case report published in 2025 walked through exactly Walter's situation in a real patient, a 77-year-old man who developed dizziness, severe itching, and a sharply elevated creatinine level. Creatinine being the lab marker doctors use to measure kidney function after a prolonged period of high-dose vitamin D supplementation. His case progressed from acute kidney injury into chronic kidney disease, and along the way, he developed serious gastrointestinal bleeding that required transfusions. That is one documented, real-world outcome of a habit that looks, from the outside, like nothing more than a daily wellness ritual. Let's go through the specific ways this plays out, because the danger rarely looks like danger while it's happening. The first danger is what I'll call the megadose habit. This is not about a standard daily multivitamin. The cases that end up in hospital reports involve doses far beyond the standard recommendation, tens of thousands of international units taken daily, sometimes for months at a time, occasionally through injectable formulations rather than ordinary pills. In one documented case, a 75-year-old man was prescribed 50,000 international units of vitamin D, two daily, alongside a calcium supplement for a full year. He developed a peak blood calcium level nearly double the normal upper limit, along with measurable injury to his heart. In another case, a 56-year-old woman, following a non standard protocol, took a cumulative total of 78 million international units of vitamin D3 over 20 months, an average of around 130,000 units a day. She arrived at the hospital with nausea, vomiting, and muscle weakness. Her kidney filtration rate, the number doctors use to grade how well your kidneys are working, had dropped to a level consistent with serious kidney injury. It took her kidneys roughly 6 months to recover, and her vitamin D levels took 18 months to come back down to normal. A third documented case involved a 60-year-old woman who took 40,000 units of vitamin D3 daily for more than 10 months. Her blood vitamin D level peaked at nearly 6 times the normal upper range, though in her case, the body's compensating mechanisms held off the worst symptoms. A reminder that this risk doesn't announce itself on a fixed timeline, and two people on similar doses can have very different experiences before anything visible shows up. The bridge between this danger and the next one is simple. High doses alone are risky, but they become far riskier the moment you add a second mineral into the mix. That second danger is the calcium and vitamin D combination, and it is one of the most common blind spots in how older adults actually supplement. Many people over 60 take a calcium and vitamin D combination tablet specifically because their doctor mentioned bone density once, years ago, and they've simply continued ever since without anyone rechecking. A systematic review and meta-analysis that pooled data from 48 studies and nearly 20,000 participants found that vitamin D supplementation, especially when combined with calcium, measurably raised the risk of hypercalcemia and of hypercalciuria, which means too much calcium passing through your urine. A separate Cochrane review of randomized trials found that vitamin D taken together with calcium increased the risk of kidney stones by roughly 17% compared with people who weren't taking the combination. A later trial in postmenopausal women taking 10,000 units of vitamin D daily alongside calcium carbonate found a more than threefold increase in hypercalciuria compared with a much lower standard dose. The takeaway is not that calcium or vitamin D are dangerous on their own at sensible doses. It's that stacking them without monitoring is where the real risk concentrates, and that's a habit, not a one-time decision. This particular danger is worth sitting with for a moment because of how ordinary the trigger usually is. Nobody decides one day to start risking my kidneys. They decide to support their bones, get handed two supplements instead of one because that felt thorough, and then simply never revisit that decision again for years. The risk isn't in the intention. It's in the years of silence between starting the combination and anyone checking whether it's still the right amount for where your body is now. The third danger is the one I think is the most important to hear because it doesn't look like a kidney problem at all when it starts. It looks like getting old. Hypercalcemia from vitamin D toxicity frequently shows up first as confusion, memory trouble, or what doctors call altered mental status. And in an older adult, that gets written off constantly as ordinary age-related decline or even early dementia when the real cause is sitting in a blood test nobody ordered. A study out of a tertiary hospital tracked 19 elderly patients, average age just over 72, who were admitted with confusion or altered mental status that turned out to be caused by vitamin D toxicity. Every one of them had received injectable vitamin D. Their average cumulative intake was over 2.5 million international units. 12 of the 19 had moderate hypercalcemia, and one had a severe case. 85% of them came to the emergency department because someone noticed they seemed mentally different, not because anyone suspected a vitamin. The researchers were direct about the lesson. Older adults are more vulnerable to this than younger people, and doctors should be checking blood levels before pushing higher doses, not after. What makes this particular danger so easy to miss is the order in which symptoms tend to appear in families, not hospitals. A spouse or an adult child notices mom seems a little foggier lately, or dad is repeating himself more, and the natural assumption for almost everyone, including many family doctors at a first glance, is that this is simply the next stage of aging. Nobody's first thought is to ask what supplements are on the kitchen counter. That is precisely the gap this danger lives in. The fourth danger compounds everything above it, and it's simply this. After 65, your kidneys are already working with a smaller margin for error. Kidney function declines gradually as a normal part of aging, even in people who feel completely healthy and have never been told they have any kidney issue. That means the exact same dose of vitamin D that a 40-year-old's kidneys could clear and adjust for without strain may sit closer to a tipping point in a 70-year-old's kidneys, simply because there's less reserve capacity to begin with. Researchers studying vitamin D toxicity have noted plainly that children and the elderly are more prone to developing hypercalcemia as vitamin D doses increase compared with healthy younger adults. This is exactly why the same habit, say a daily high-dose supplement started in your 50s, can be perfectly fine for years and then quietly become a problem once your kidney reserve has naturally thinned with age. Nothing about your routine changed. Your body's margin for that routine did. There's a fifth danger that almost nobody thinks about because it doesn't come from one bottle. It comes from several bottles at once. Most people picture vitamin D toxicity as a single obvious overdose, but in practice, it's usually the slow stacking of ordinary, well-intentioned sources that nobody adds up. A daily multivitamin with a few hundred units, a separate vitamin D tablet recommended at a pharmacy counter, a calcium and vitamin D combination for bone health, fortified milk or orange juice at breakfast. None of those individually looks like much, but your body doesn't know which bottle a unit of vitamin D came from. It only knows the total dose arriving in your system every single day, and that fat-soluble storage tank we talked about earlier fills from every source combined. This is precisely how someone can end up at a dangerously high cumulative intake while sincerely believing they're only taking the one the doctor mentioned. The safe action here is almost embarrassingly simple. Once a year, lay out every bottle in your cabinet that lists vitamin D on the label, and bring that full list, not just the one you remember, to your doctor or pharmacist, so the total can actually be added up by someone trained to do the math. I want to slow down on the mechanism for a moment because understanding it is what makes all five of these dangers make sense at once, instead of feeling like five unrelated warnings. Picture your kidneys as a water treatment plant that runs continuously, filtering your entire blood supply many times over each day and deciding mineral by mineral what gets kept and what gets sent out in your urine. Calcium is one of the substances that plant is built to handle in a fairly narrow, steady range. When vitamin D is at a healthy level, it acts like a thermostat, gently telling your gut and your bones how much calcium to release into that water supply, enough to keep your bones strong, not so much that the treatment plant gets overwhelmed. When vitamin D climbs too high for too long, that thermostat gets stuck in the release more position. The treatment plant downstream, your kidneys, has to work harder and harder to filter out the surplus. Calcium itself in excess is mildly toxic to the very filtering units, called nephrons, that do this work. Over time, those filtering units can scar and stop functioning, which is the literal definition of declining kidney function. And once enough nephrons are damaged, the kidneys become even less able to clear the calcium that caused the damage in the first place, which is exactly the self-reinforcing cycle that shows up in every one of the hospital cases we've covered tonight. Here is where I need to draw a hard line, because this is the part where fear can do real damage if I leave it unclear. This does not mean vitamin D itself is dangerous, and it does not mean you should stop taking a supplement your doctor prescribed. The research is just as clear that low vitamin D is genuinely harmful for older adults. It's tied to weaker bones, more fractures, and more falls. The standard recommended doses used in most prescriptions, generally up to around 4,000 international units a day for adults, have a long track record of safety in healthy older populations when levels are checked periodically. The danger profile we've walked through almost always involves doses far above that standard range, sustained for months, frequently without follow up blood work, and frequently stacked with calcium. The line between a nuisance and an emergency is exactly that. A properly monitored standard dose is a nuisance to worry about. An unmonitored megadose, taken for months, especially with calcium on top, is what shows up in the emergency department. So, what does the safe version of this actually look like? It starts with one number worth knowing: your blood calcium and your vitamin D level, both checked together, not assumed. If you've been on a vitamin D supplement for more than a few months, especially a higher dose one your doctor prescribed for a deficiency, it is worth asking specifically whether your levels have been rechecked since you started. Medical guidance on vitamin D safety generally recommends an initial recheck within roughly 2 to 3 months of starting a higher dose, then periodic monitoring after that, precisely because this is a slow building issue that blood work catches long before symptoms do. If you are taking a combined calcium and vitamin D product, that conversation matters even more, because that is the exact combination tied to the largest increase in risk in the research we just covered. And if you, or someone you love, has had unexplained confusion, new fatigue, persistent thirst, or that specific kind of generalized weakness that doesn't have an obvious cause, it is worth asking your doctor directly whether a calcium and vitamin D level should be part of the workup rather than assuming it's simply age. It also helps to know roughly where the safe range sits, so you have a frame of reference for the conversation rather than walking in with nothing but a worry. Medical guidance generally treats 4,000 international units a day as the practical upper boundary for most healthy adults without specific medical supervision, and treats blood vitamin D levels above roughly 150 nanograms per milliliter as a marker associated with toxicity risk. Compare that to the cases we walked through tonight: 50,000 units daily, over 100,000 units daily, cumulative totals in the millions of units, and the gap is enormous. This is not a story about ordinary supplementation gone slightly wrong. It is a story about doses many, many times higher than the standard range sustained for months without anyone checking the numbers in between. That gap is exactly why a brief conversation with your doctor, armed with your actual dose and your actual labs, can put this entire risk to rest in most cases within a single appointment. I want to be just as clear about what not to do. Do not stop a prescribed vitamin D supplement on your own because of what you just heard. Stopping a medication or supplement abruptly carries its own risks, and only your doctor has the full picture of your bone health, your fall risk, and your actual blood levels. The safe action here is not subtraction, it's a conversation and a blood test brought to your next appointment, not a decision made alone at home tonight. Bring your actual bottle or a photo of the label so the exact dose can be checked against your labs rather than guessed at. If there is one emergency level signal worth remembering from everything we've covered, it's this: severe confusion that comes on relatively quickly, especially paired with nausea, vomiting, or extreme weakness in someone taking vitamin D supplements, is not something to wait out. That combination is exactly what showed up again and again in the hospitalized cases we just reviewed. A nuisance is feeling a little more tired than usual. An emergency is sudden, marked confusion with vomiting, and that warrants a same-day call to your doctor or a trip to urgent care, not a wait-and-see approach. Here's the doctrine I want you to walk away with, because it applies far beyond vitamin D. More of something good is not automatically better, especially once your body's filtering systems have quietly aged with you. Vitamin D genuinely helps your bones. Calcium genuinely helps your bones. But your kidneys are the ones doing the cleanup work behind the scenes for both of them. And after 65, that cleanup crew has less spare capacity than it used to. The fix is not fear of the supplement. It's the simple habit of checking rather than assuming, particularly if you've been on the same dose for a year or more without anyone rechecking your numbers. To recap the 5 things worth carrying out of this video tonight. First, megadoses sustained for months are where the real danger lives, not standard daily amounts. Second, combining vitamin D with a calcium supplement meaningfully raises the risk, so that combination specifically deserves a monitoring conversation. Third, confusion or sudden mental fog in an older adult is not automatically just age. It is worth ruling out a calcium and vitamin D check, because that exact symptom is what brought the majority of hospitalized cases we covered tonight through the emergency room doors. Fourth, your kidneys naturally have less reserve capacity after 65, so a dose that was fine for years can become a problem purely because your margin has changed, not because anything about your routine did. And fifth, total intake matters more than any single bottle. Add up every source, not just the one you remember once a year with your doctor or pharmacist. None of these 5 points is a reason to panic. All 5 are reasons to ask one simple, specific question at your next appointment. What is my current calcium and vitamin D level, and when was it last checked? Before you go, if you take a vitamin D supplement, tell me in the comments how long it's been since your levels were last checked. I read these, and it helps me know what to cover next for people in exactly your situation. And if this explains something you've never had explained to you before, there's another habit almost as common as this one quietly affecting people after 65 all. The medication timing mistake that can undo a blood pressure pill entirely. That's the one I'd watch next.